Distinguished participants, our next side event is starting.
Çiğ köfte. Kamera. Konu başlayayım mı? Tamam. Dur. Benim boyuma posuma göre değil. Peki, okey. Okay. Good evening. Thank you very much for being here, although it's quite late. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about the global supply chains and the opportunities and challenges that we see in the global markets. My name is Ergem Şenyuvatomcu. I'm the co-founder of FutureWise Partners, based in London, UK. We advise companies on sustainability strategy, value chains, and also investment strategies. In addition, I'm also the founder of Yeşilist, which is a Turkish sustainable living platform that was founded in 2010. So, global supply chains. They are extremely crucial for decarbonization, yet it is one of these issues that we are not talking enough. We know that the global supply chains are very responsible from the carbonization efforts, and a lot of the efforts have been based on reporting standards for Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, but we know very little about Scope 3 emissions, and most of it is due to the structure of the global supply chains. Most of the global companies nowadays are reporting, around more than 70% of the big companies are reporting on their emission 1, Scope 1 emissions. When it comes to Scope 2 emissions, that decreases a little bit. However, when we go to Scope 3 emissions, we have very little visibility, and it is as low as actually 53%. This may seem like a big number. It is not actually, because it varies by geography. The numbers that I've been presenting here are from the EU. And when we come to the North America, for instance, the Scope 3 emissions that are reported are only 27% of the companies. There are reasons why companies are extremely confused about the Scope 3 emissions and the global supply chains. One of them is the reporting standards, very confusing, and they're changing very rapidly. Their alphabet soup of standards are making it very hard for companies to understand what they should be doing. In addition, they're very complex in nature. An average big SME, actually, almost a big company, has around 5,000 suppliers down and upstream. And when you really want to get visibility, it's very hard to find exactly who's behind tier one suppliers. And supplier engagement is a huge problem because of transparency issues and accountability, as most companies do know who are their tier one suppliers. And that number actually, most of the tier one suppliers also outsource their work to their subcontractors, which makes traceability and transparency in this domain much harder than we think. So it's almost like scope one and emissions and tier one suppliers are almost the tip of the iceberg. But when we go down the iceberg, first we know the scope 2 emissions, a bit more visible. But once we go to scope 3 emissions to tier 3 and 4 suppliers, we get almost no visibility. And when we say I'm talking about the companies we work with. And it's been one of the biggest challenges because they have these requirements that they have to fulfill, reporting standards, they have to work with their suppliers, but that lack of visibility has been an issue that's been going on for a while. So I'd like to also present a case study that we work with Climate Strategies. We started looking at polyester. What are the impacts of polyester production downstream? What happens in the suppliers? How well do we know the impact of polyester? Polyester, as most of us know, is an extremely cheap material compared to a lot of other textile materials that are out there. And it actually represents over 2/3 of global material used in textiles. And this number is expected to grow by 3/4 by 2030. Most of the oil and gas sector is actually projecting that this number is going to grow because the demand for oil and gas, because of the EV taking center stage as opposed to diesel cars, the demand has gone down, and the expectation, the projections are based on packaging and textiles and other products that are dependent on oil and gas for textiles, for polyester. So, and just to give you a number, actually synthetic fiber uses only 1% of crude oil. This may seem like a small percentage, but when we look at the global tons, it's about 48 million tons per year. And even that is enough for decarbonization efforts. Only 17% of fashion brands disclose their emissions, knowing their raw materials. One of the biggest problems is emissions, their impact on water usage and on water pollution. And also, it is very hard to get consistent, reliable data. And one thing that we've been hearing at COP at many different venues throughout the last few days have been the reliability of data. How do we collect reliable data that is accountable and that we can use for baseline? That is something really massively missing from the global textile supply chains. Supplier engagement through the fashion industry is very, very low. And the reason, again, is because of the very complex nature of this. So this actually creates a lot of problems for brands. The first problem is this lack of visibility, understanding who are beyond the tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, and their emissions thus are very, very incomplete. When we look at the emerging TNFD requirements on the non-financial disclosures, again, most of the companies are facing this problem. When we look at the carbon footprint for the products, they are still very much based on the LCAs that are dependent from early data that is not from the ground, but that's based on guesstimations. And this actually causes a lot of brand risk and reputation going forward because of the lack of disclosure for brands. And last but not least, when we look at these global supply chains, how do they map this? How can they map the risk? How can they map the impact? This is an ongoing conversation for many brands. So there are some key challenges here. So it's one thing to look at, we need to look at this issue from multiple perspectives. One problem is the awareness on and knowledge barrier. What I mean by this is for many big companies, it is much easier to know, but what is the situation of the supplier? How well does the supplier know? So we are now we are at the Turkish pavilion. Most of the main component of the Turkish economy are the SMEs, and this is actually true for many countries. And if the SMEs are the backbones, and if we do not actually support them, how will they have the enough knowledge and capacity to do their own reporting, let alone to know their impact? So one big perception is investment in supply chains is very costly, hence we can delay this until the requirements, until the reporting standards emerge. Most of the projections are based on existing and outdated data that is not from the ground. So if the polyester production is happening in Southeast Asia, most of the projections are actually based on data from Europe, which is going to have very different impact on land, water, carbon emissions, and so forth. There are a lot of complications across the value chain. One of the complications actually rests with, again, this lack of visibility. In order to have the right implementation of environmental metrics in the supply chain, we need that engagement. But there are problems with this engagement because most companies, when they look at their suppliers, there is a very top-down approach. This top-down approach is actually holds them back from this growth mindset of doing things. Let me give you one example. According to some work that we have done with textile manufacturers globally, we have found out that when the suppliers put the companies put these measures and expectations on their suppliers actually tend to give data, but that may not be the data that's collected from their work, or it is very costly. They don't have the capacity. Something that actually has been implemented by HQ is going to look very different on the ground. This actually puts a lot of pressure on the workers. That puts pressure on the workers on the ground, the resources that most suppliers do not have. Cost for the supplier is a huge issue. Cost of capital is very expensive globally. And when suppliers are expected to deliver these results, even capacity building, it's actually taking time from their resources and putting it into capacity building with even knowledge training, which we know is very integral, but may actually deter action on the ground. There's a resistant mindset. Many companies are resistant towards what can happen. Can this really make change? How is that engagement going to happen? So we need to look at this issue by putting different hats on. We cannot just look at it from a policy perspective, or we cannot look at it from a purely corporate perspective. This top-down supplier engagement has been a problem because it's this. Not only that it's not about understanding the problems with the suppliers, it's more about we think this is going to be good for the suppliers, which may not really be definitive. So companies really need to understand where their suppliers are, which segment do they operate in, what geography, what are the pain points of that geography that they are working on. However, when we look at this, there are a lot of opportunities that we see happening. One of the things that we have been talking a lot here at COP28 has been cost of capital and sharing risk. So how can public-private partnerships help decarbonize supply chains? Another question that is emerging is the nature-based solutions for decarbonizing supply chains. There are a lot of examples which companies can use with either closed-loop supply chains or with using nature-based solutions for carbon offsetting in order to to decrease their impact on the emissions. So are suppliers just partners, or can they be stakeholders, just like nature? We have been talking a lot around seeing suppliers as a stakeholder. How can they also be at the table to make the decisions along with companies? And taking this viewpoint of the supplier really changes the whole narrative. Governance and power structures. Obviously, most of the supply chains are in countries that are Turkey is a major textile manufacturer, for instance. China, Bangladesh, Pakistan, countries from Asia, Africa. So we need to know exactly what is happening in terms of, rather than doing this very top-down approach of power structure, how is that structure can be reallocated? We are seeing a lot of people from indigenous communities here at COP28. It requires this discussion, having them at the table to understand how can we empower them so that empowerment can actually pay off. And clearly, we are talking about renewable energy resources. They are important in decarbonization, but again, what are the capacities of the country these supply chains operate in? How can they be utilized? What kind of certifications do they need? So what we are actually seeing sitting in the EU or in developed countries may be very different than what is required or what suppliers are capable of on the ground. So that's a very big shift actually we are seeing. How do we align these expectations? We are looking for traceability, we are looking for transparency, we are looking for data that is reliable. Yet, if we do not empower the supplier in the right way, but understanding their circumstances, as opposed to doing a sort of a one-size-fits-all approach, has not been serving us currently. There's a lot of material and process efficiency that we've been seeing, especially in the food, agriculture, and textile industry. And this is actually helping companies to really recalibrate their supply chain sustainability. Usually, from a very traditional perspective, when we say supply chain sustainability, the perception is looking at it as a risk management, looking at it as an optimization of the supply chain. These are very important. But now we have different standards that are emerging just because of the massive problems that we are seeing, from the waste issue to all the way to reporting standards. Companies do not want to have these reputational or climate risks or nature risks that can be associated with them due to lack of understanding and due to lack of collaboration with the suppliers. So without further ado, I'd like to stop this presentation, and I'd like to thank everyone for being here. But I also intended this to be an interactive session. So if you have any questions or any suggestions and feedback, I would like to hear and hear about your views. Thank you. We can always talk later. Thank you very much. Turkish companies are actually becoming they are actually, because they're global, they are in the global supply chains. First of all, most of the companies, because of the carbon adjustment border mechanism, they're very aware of the compliance requirements. But that's actually some of the sectors, the heavy emitter sectors. However, when we look at the sectors that are not this first layer, what are they doing? And what we see emerging in the EU is these companies are going to be asked to also deliver on their environmental product measures, on their sustainability, on their circular economy measures. What kind of engagement and reporting standards are they delivering? What is the data? So knowing this, we see a lot of momentum. And one of the things I think that I'm very proud to say is Turkish companies are always ahead of the game and always taking the necessary standards to engage with their suppliers to really understand their impact, and they have been a pivotal figure in terms of delivering to companies outside of Turkey, just because they usually meet very high standards. This is something that is not very easy for suppliers to do. In terms of the suppliers beyond, like suppliers, when we look at the tier 3, tier 4 suppliers, again, there is this problem that we are seeing with scope 3 or further tier 4 supplier emissions. That data is lacking, but that's actually something that it has to be mapped out by the main company that is driving this measures. And we see a lot of progress on the Turkish side in terms of really looking at this holistically, taking the right measures, and working towards collecting data, capacity building, and most importantly, creating baselines. But as we always say, sustainability is not a means to an end, but it's a journey. So it's something that is happening slowly, and luckily we have the necessary policy environment also emerging. And earlier we were talking about the necessary financing mechanisms, because in the absence of necessary public partner financing, none of this could actually be realized. I get into the sector because when I started working on sustainability, it has been seen as a CSR issue, a corporate social responsibility. However, if you're talking really about a true sustainable product, and we need to understand the full supply chain of a product. And when we look at the life cycle analysis of these products, we cannot look at them in isolation. It's a very multi-stakeholder problem. So I started learning about the global supply chains, and the more I learned, the more actually I was astonished to find out that the impact of global supply chains make on the environment, on climate change. And until COVID, we'd never actually talked about the breakability of the supply chains. And with COVID, we realized that we don't have resilient supply chains. We were talking earlier there is a very serious supply chain problem in the battery industry, in many industries, and this has been ongoing. But in order for us to tackle them, we need to understand not only the impact, but how can we create alternative resources? How can we create alternative materials that is going to help us advance without any delays in our supply chains? So that's actually what led me to work on this. Thank you very much for being here.